podcasting since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts Radio Network, kingofpodcasts.com.
The state of talk radio and what podcasting and talk radio can learn from each other.
The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
And I'm thrilled to go ahead and welcome a special guest here on the Broadcasters Podcast. My next guest is one of the most influential figures in modern radio, a pioneer in both talk and music formats, and a driving force in industry trade publishing. He's editor and publisher of Talkers Magazine, which is celebrating its 35th year, widely recognized as a leading authority on radio communications and public opinion. And the career, which we'll get into very shortly, goes back to the coining of album-oriented rock, or AOR, shaping progressive rock radio at legendary stations like WLIR FM and WNEW FM in New York, launching groundbreaking talk shows, serving as the first managing editor of Radio and Records, appointed by the United Nations as UNESCO's executive advisor to World Radio Day 2024. He's a passionate advocate for the First Amendment and a critical voice shaping the future of audio media. I'm here with Michael Harrison. Michael, thank you for being on. I'm so glad to have you on the program.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you, Jorge. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
It's my pleasure. And there's a lot to go and talk about. And one of the things I can say is that going back to your time in New York City on radio initially. So originally it was Long Island, New York, WLIR, moving to WNEW, and the story of where you were able to go in, you and Richard Neer, a long-time cohort of yours, made it into WNEW, and he put in his book, the book called FM, The Rise and Fall of Rock Radio. I've read it twice. Talk about freeform ethos and creative freedom. And again, that's a different time altogether, but I feel like some of the freedom and the creativity that was on radio, those many years ago, you still see it today, but it's now on the internet. But now, in those pioneering days, Michael, how much of the DJ success was tied to artistic expression and deep music knowledge? Because, that's what was the fabric of what made great radio, just to, encompass what the music was. Being the tastemaker and also being the person that guides you into great music and getting to go and explore it together.
We had tremendous respect for the music. We were radio guys. We were young. We were college kids, but we had extraordinarily high regard for the music. We didn't consider rock music as the 60s progressed. We didn't consider it to be, for kids. We didn't consider it to be, trite. We considered it to be heavy-duty art, a conveyor of the culture, if you will, a sign of the changing times. There was that kind of electricity in the air. So this new kind of radio that we developed, meaning the people within that school of broadcasting that I was part of and was influential in, we took it very seriously and developed a new way of targeting young people based upon the presumption that they were intelligent. Just because we were aiming at an 18 to 34 demographic, and there were a lot of college kids in there. They had opinions about the war. They had opinions about politics. There was a whole social change taking place. It wasn't just, the innocent, somewhat insipid love songs of the 50s and the early 60s, which were good. Rock and roll was great, but they didn't deal with death and freedom and justice and history and all of the things that the music began to reflect.
And Michael, it's the parallels of what you had in new technology with FM radio, still kind of early on. You're still getting people to go and adapt and adopt into that format. Plus, it was just that pioneering that was there because it was trying to go counterculture to what was 50s and 60s top 40 radio. And, even some of the folks that you had come into the space, such, a wide spectrum of voices from Jonathan Schwartz to Scott Soul Music coming from top 40 into the station. And then, thinking about Alison Bird, Nightbird, Alison Steele. And just, I got to hear air checks that people have put up on YouTube and places to go ahead and get a feel of what that station was and just how amazing it was at that time. Even at the time having competition, because you had WOR just the other way, which then flipped because, the stations went ahead, companies changed, formats to go more mainstream. But one of the things was that was what WNEW gave live concerts. You're going and doing things where it's just completely open the format, and then just the opening of all the artists that would come in that you would go ahead and get to encounter and talk to on a regular basis. It was amazing.
Right. Well, as Chris Christopherson wrote in Me and Bobby McGee, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. The powers that be in the corporate radio world, the ones that own the big AM radio stations and the top 40 stations, they didn't sit down one day and say, let's do something that's going to, push the culture and great radio forward into the future. It was, what are we going to do with these FM signals we've got now that we're able to simulcast, or now that we're able to do something different on them? Suddenly they realized they had these venues. So they hired old DJs that they considered to be washed up from, with all due respect to Scott Muni, and they gave them an opportunity at a very low salary to do stuff, and they didn't have a lot of commercials, and album tracks were becoming popular, 7-minute tracks, like Light My Fire and things of that nature. So this format just developed out of, it was accidental, but they ran with it. And the cast of characters that you mentioned at NEWFM were very inspirational to me and to my friends in radio out on Long Island. And we started a station, WLIR, to emulate that form of radio, but to do it focused on what I coined in those days, the Long Island culture. That, hey, the kids on Long Island, they don't need to have WNEW represent them. We've got nightclubs and coffee shops and boutiques and head shops and all of the stuff that marked that culture out here on Long Island, and we created a Long Island version of WNEW-FM, and it was just as good, if not better. Right. And they wound up hiring me and Richard Neer. Richard Neer was kind of my partner in putting this thing together, and it was very successful on the island, and we both wound up on WNEW-FM very quickly within 1 year of launching that format.
And there was, after you had changed the format, and I think it was classical. It was something else was more eclectic, but it was almost like that WKRP in Cincinnati kind of feel, from just like, comfortable music into rock and roll, and just complete culture shock and a big change to all that. But now, in that same book, Richard's book, he also makes the point where he talks about where you go after WNEW, because then you start becoming really good at, the real personal one-on-one interviews. You're talking to Bruce Springsteen. You got to know him very well, of course. And then going to George Harrison's house in England, I think it was, and just the people you got to go and connect with. And that would lead you into moving to Los Angeles, subsequent role as managing editor of Radio Records, a real shift in your career. And, away from on-air talent and shaping industry metrics and data. At the time, that's when you had competitive publications. You still had Cashbox. I think Record World might have still been around at the time. And then Billboard is still today. But the thing was, in the music today, because I want to get your music take on what's going on today with music, because the balance between quantifying music success through charts and data, like Radio Records did, like Billboard has done, and preserving the organic creative listener-host connection. So what you did at WLR, what you did at WNEW, there's a stagnation now on the Billboard Hot 100. Music labels, record labels can't really do much. They don't want to go ahead and take the time to invest and promote major artists and put something out there because they feel like they can have a long shelf life with certain artists. Let them have a song on the chart for up to a year, because the methodology about Billboard Hot 100 has not changed in a while.
No, it hasn't. As a matter of fact, the last time it really changed was when I changed it. I was involved circa 1980 in helping Billboard redesign their charts. Prior to that, I had a publication called Good Phone Weekly, which I sold to Billboard around 1979, 1980. And before that, I was managing editor and inventing the charts with a good team. Bob Wilson was the publisher, a genius in these matters, and I owe him a lot. We designed a very new way of doing charting at Radio and Records, all geared to the way radio played music. The three publications you mentioned, Billboard, Cashbox, and Record World, were trade magazines that they tipped the hat to radio, but that was all. They were based on being record industry trades. When Wilson started Radio and Records, he created what he called the Tiffany of tip sheets. And it was, we didn't know what it was. It was originally called the industry newspaper. And it was a combination of a trade journal and a philosophical blog, even though there was no digital era back then. And it had a tremendous impact. So that began everything. But I also was at KMET. I left New York City to take on the role of program director of KPRI in San Diego, because they allowed me to use the term AOR, and they allowed me to do some of the principles of AOR that I had been already developing when I was at WNEW in New York. And then KPRI became a tremendous success in San Diego, and R&R was building big very well. I was in San Diego when we started R&R in LA. And I eventually left San Diego, came to LA, became managing editor of Radio and Records, full-time job, full-time career, and was offered air work and advisory work as a consultant at Metro Media's KMET. And so I started an 11-year career at KMET as a talk show host, a DJ, and as a behind-the-scenes consultant. I continued to be managing editor of R&R for about 5 years. I became a syndicated radio personality with Westwood One and CBS and those, and I did that out of LA. And eventually, I wanted to be involved in talk radio, so I bought a station in Springfield, Massachusetts, WSPR. Left LA, moved to Springfield, never left New England, and have conducted my career since then. I started Talkers in 1990, 35 years ago. So I've been on a lot of tracks, Jorge. I have a career as an air personality, as a program director, as a syndicated personality, as a syndicator, as a trade publisher, trade editor, columnist, and I still do this. I'm still doing all that. I'm in radio now for 59 years. 59 years, and I don't work as hard as I used to, but I still work pretty hard, and I'm very active.
But you've been able to chronicle basically the entire generation of talk radio that we have today. So let's say, okay, really for me, I know that talk radio made the big sea change with WABC in 1982, which is from top, what was now more like a more adult-oriented top 40 to talk Ross and Wilson, you had Dr. Joyce Brothers and others coming in, and KFI would change, and eventually other stations around the country. And one of the things that I noticed with yourself, like you said at KMET, you did have one of the first FM talk shows with Harrison's Mike on KMET. And
oh yeah, one
of the things I want to make mention of is that it's one of those things where, just like yourself, it's something about the transition for those that were, playing records, being DJs in music, and making the switch. And of course, some of the biggest names in talk radio did that. So Sean Hannity came from music. Rush Limbaugh came from music. I think Glenn Beck also, remember, what came from music was the morning shows. And all these folks would eventually make that change over, and they were able to go and translate themselves with the entertainment that they have. Knowing how to go do that, but then also letting their political opinions come out, however that was, if it was really theirs or not, but we'd never make that point. But something about that path, something about that part that you felt like, did you understand that from yourself, making the transition from music to talk, and what the bigger names in talk radio that we've had in our career have done the same thing?
Well, I mean, I believed that the future of radio was talk. That's why I bought a radio station to turn it into a talk station, and invested my time and money in that, because I thought that was going to be the big thing in the 90s. Even though I was very involved in album-oriented rock radio, we did interviews on album-oriented rock radio. We dealt with politics. We dealt with culture. We dealt with things other than just frivolity and the most superficial things, which is what they did on Top 40 radio. And we created a counter culture in the business as well as on the air, targeting, we targeted hippies. And then the hippies got older, and new generations came along. Nothing stays hip and nothing stays young for long. Everything moves forward, and yesterday's underground becomes tomorrow's mainstream, and then it becomes passe, and then it becomes retro, and then it becomes underground again. There's a cycle to these things that you start to pick up on, and you say, I've seen this before. It's happening again. But I would think that the most important personality to come along during this period of transitioning from music-oriented radio to talk radio being hip, to talk radio being pop culture, and to talk radio making money, getting ratings, and expanding in terms of station by station across the country and syndication, I think that you cannot have that conversation without paying deference to Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh was the George Washington of the whole thing. I would say the two most instrumental forces in talk radio emerging in the 90s as the cultural and industry and communications phenomenon that it did was Rush Limbaugh and Talkers Magazine. Now, I won't say me. I started Talkers Magazine, but Talkers Magazine quickly took on a life way beyond me. And it provided a venue, a community, documentation, journalism. It chronicled and encouraged and defended this new format called talk radio. And Rush, of course, was he was the Elvis Presley. He was the Beatles. He was the big, Tiger Woods. He was the big talent that, the trends go where the talent lies. Politics played a role in it, but politics didn't emerge until much later when it became fractionalized and audiences were selected based on their potential. They were targeted. And today you have a whole different type of approach to audiences where politics is part of the criteria that you choose to tell people what they want to hear and then get them to like you and get a big number.
Well, and the thing is, in the market of what we have right now, in the way that that radio is right now with all the networks that we have, public opinion have had the chance to go ahead and people have had the money to go ahead and put out stations, put out hosts of whichever side of the political spectrum that you are, and conservative has basically been able to dominate for the most part in that space. But the other part is into the 80s into the 90s, we also did have a general spectrum of interest in other formats besides political, because you had Dr. Laura, you had Coast to Coast AM has been around for so long. And that also comes in the realm. And then you think we're on the FM talk side with Howard Stern or Tom Likas. And, I would think of Phil Henry also going on the comedy side. We had a lot of wide-ranging entertainment and, enjoyment on those stations. And I think even on the local end, at that time in the 90s, local talk really dominated as well. When I would think of Neil Rogers or Randy Rose here down at WIOD and just having a great time and just what we had in terms of just a load of choices in talk radio to go to. But now we are at the point where, in the 2025, we see that, there's corporations that are, or the major syndicators right now that really, they are in charge of programming a lot of stations, no matter what size market it is. And the path for radio talent to come in now, it used to be from regional powerhouse, rising through the ranks. I feel like there's been a bit of an atrophy fit of in it, because I also think sometimes I will think, well, it might be who that makes your way up the ladder into a syndicator or get a syndicated deal. Obviously, that's the route of what all these talk show hosts now that are trying to work their way up. But I feel like the pipeline, the recruitment that we used to have, a bullpen, if you will, it's kind of changed, because now it's not necessarily coming from within radio, but it's coming from outside. When you see Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, or you saw Dan Bongino for a while come in, or, Charlie Kirk, it just feels like we're getting it from outside, and it's not the normal pipeline that we have. What is it about that you think that changed with radio, and why we're not going from within like it used to?
Well, we don't have local stations like we used to, so we don't have a built-in farm system where people would work their way up to larger markets, from a smaller market to a medium market to a larger market. That whole paradigm doesn't exist anymore for many, many reasons that defy a quick answer. But let's just say you did a good job in explaining some of the reasons why that's happened. The passage of time changes things. It changes the people. It changes the demographics. It changes the culture. And we're talking talking about a tremendous amount of time has gone by in terms of monitoring and following the evolution of radio and of music and of the generations. I mean, we no longer are dealing with baby boomers as being the youth culture; they're the old culture. We have the Xers who are not sure if they're millennials or what they are, and you have the millennials, and now we have generation, Z and G and B and A and Alpha. I mean, it's crazy to try to attach sensibilities that were popular in 1985 to 2025 or 1965. So it's been enormously challenging. Fortunately, a lot of smart people have been in both the talk and the music end of radio following all this. But that's basically what it is. We now recruit from the internet, we recruit from podcasting, and we recruit from real life because we don't have that many young people going into radio wanting to work their way up. So, and what we've recently done at Talkers is we've started to turn our attention to working hand in hand with college radio, because where are you going to find young people interested in radio? You're going to find them at all the campus stations around the country, and their audiences are people that are young people listening to radio. So I think that the radio industry has to pay a little more attention to what's going on in the communication departments at universities, colleges, and even high schools around the country to keep fresh blood and talent coming into the business with fresh new audiences interested in what they have to say and perform.
Now, Michael, I try not to be. I have been very critical on my podcast about the corporate side of the industry, and I've made no bones about that. Just I think when you have radio companies, several of the largest radio companies right now in the country that are holding on to millions of dollars of debt, or billions of dollars of debt for that matter, for iHeart and Odyssey, and going through private equity and going through and, having people that might not have that radio savvy to really know what they can do to help make all their stations operate, bring in a lot of advertising revenue that would offset, people that are going to pay down their interest or what their liens are. The thing is that radio itself within the larger stations that own all this. So Premier Radio might be able to put all their stuff out there, Salem, but they only have so much revenue that's coming in and so much support coming in for all these talk show hosts to really be able to go and, build above ground. And if you want to go ahead and build a new syndicated show and get it up there, it's like there's not much help coming from them. And I think that's one of the things where to have, program directors that can be in there that are not so much worried about, checking the logs and trying to make sure whatever ads are being pushed and kind of being deferred away from what they're able to really do, which is help to enhance and coach and train the next set of talk show hosts instead of having to go outside. Talk to me about what the communications have been with the, like the Bob Pippins of the world, of the, David Fields of the world, and just what they're saying right now about what to do to help support talk radio, because I feel like they're kind of restricted on what they can do, and that's not helping much.
Well, the corporate powers that be are stuck, in the reality of having to generate revenue, have to please their stockholders, have to deal with new competition for radio from the digital era, generational divides, taking some very bad choices during the era of consolidation and investing in radio stations at prices that were off the charts in terms of sustainability. Now they're stuck with holding the bag of debt. And they're not evil people who went about trying to destroy radio. They just wound up inheriting a lot of bad decisions and a lot of bad debt that their predecessors kind of accrued for them. The people that are running these radio stations now are they're well-meaning. They're just in many ways drowning in circumstances and doing the best they can. In some cases, because of the economics of scale, we have more radio than we would have had they not done that. Many of the stations that were mom-and-pop stations and were eventually consolidated, they might have gone out of business had it not been for the consolidators. So there's more to this than casting blame that somehow the guys that are running today's corporate radio stations are not doing their job of protecting radio and not being altruistic enough. They've got a lot of challenges and it's difficult. They're doing the best they can. The question is, where's it going?
I honestly believe you make a great point with the fact that there's an inheritance of what was the situation they came into. and they're trying to go and work their way through it, but it's not that easy. And again, even for some of those stockholders right now that, they've had stocks for some of these companies that have been delisted or threatened to be delisted. And now they're trying to go ahead and trying to go and pay back for those that got in on initial public offering that might have come back from bankruptcy. There's a lot of things going to it. That's not a great situation to get into. But I mean, I will respect the fact that they got a really bad situation on their hands. They're trying to do their best. Now, consolidation in the 90s, now we're going to come back to that again because the SEC right now under Brendan Carr is considering significant changes to media ownership rules. So the delete initiative going through right now, they're going to get public comment, but their deal is, as you said yourself, broadcasters are now competing with the internet, not just amongst themselves. I don't know if I agree with that myself, but if you're opening up ownership rules so that, whatever radio stations, if they get encompassed by other media companies, and it could be just a free reign of what mergers and acquisitions could come at this point if that opens up, where there's no more of an 8-station cap. The ownership caps get dropped is what the plan would be. So what would this mean about if it's going to accelerate consolidation, diminish localism, exacerbate talent pipelines like we already talked about? When you're looking at this and you've been following the story, what do you think about what could change of the industry if the SEC dropped the caps?
Well, you're basing the entire question on a premise that radio is forever going to be a major iconic platform upon which so much of society's communication takes place. What you're not taking into account is that the platform itself is in many ways obsolete when measured by the standards of the 20th century. Therefore, it is not a given that radio could ever go back to what it was, because what it was has no foundation in the present paradigm. The fact that there are so many signals and such an easy path to participating in the industry, there are no barriers to entry as there were back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, before the 21st century started to really become digital and podcasting and online and satellite radio and all that. The point being, radio stations' inherent value culturally as an iconic platform and financially as a result of being so important, the value of radio stations has come down tremendously. Therefore, it's not as big a deal as to how many stations can somebody own, because you can own 1,000 stations and it doesn't have the same impact that in 1975 owning 5 major market radio stations would have. So we're dealing with, the times have changed. It's like arguing over, covered wagons. Who's going to control the covered wagon business in the 20th century? Who's going to control, buggy whips? Radio stations are largely obsolete. They still, though, have a role because things don't end in one day. Things fade and blend into other things. And what we're seeing now... Yeah.
I would be, this is where I'm going to push back a little bit, only because this is where the part of me as a radiophile all my life, I like to look, there's a positive, I see sunrise in the uplands if it's possible, because I think there's a couple things that radio can withstand. Number one, I don't think AI can be a factor with radio. I don't think it can. I don't think you can replicate trying to go ahead and say, okay, let's go and get Paul Harvey's voice. We're going to clone him and put back rest of the story, or Casey Case's American Top 40. We're not going to go back to that. And yes, you're right about, where there's certain things that are not going to go back the way it were. I still think that if record labels were smart, they don't want to go ahead and deal with the small amount of money they're getting from streaming services, even though they might be invested in a Spotify. They might have, a couple of points in the game. Either which way, I think if music labels would work with radio stations again, go back to working with each other. Because if you can promote an artist, their concerts, promote if they actually have other merchandise or vinyl or just something else that's a physical copy. Get back to something that will create a physical copy, a widget, whatever it might be, that doesn't have to be bought online. You could go back to that. And with talk radio, I think there's still a dynamic. If talk shows go back to a real live feedback. Now, it doesn't mean we have to go and have the same, batch of callers, the same 1% of people that are just kind of bland and, monotonous coming on the radio. But I think there's something to be said about if you did have live feedback, not from, social media posts or tweets or, other or emails or texts or whatever it might be. I think if there was a way to get back to something where the real time formatics of it, and I think it can be done cost efficient. So I don't want to, I'd like to go and think the radio is not obsolete. I think it just needs to find its new purpose. What do you think?
Well, I never said radio's obsolete, and I never said anything that your pushback is pushing back on.
I'm sorry.
I'm simply telling you the reality of the situation, and you're telling me your opinion of what it should do. They're two very different things. Yeah, you're right. It would be nice if they did that. Go get them to do that. Have fun. That's your opinion. But the fact of the matter is that there are a few people in this country that are more pro radio and boost radio more than me. I mean, Talkers Magazine remains radio centric, even though there are problems, but you got to face the problems. And I cited the problems that radio faces based upon your premise that somehow radio could go back to its glory days as a platform among a handful of platforms. There were movies, there were magazines, newspapers, television, and radio. And that was it. Those were the big ones. Now we have all these exotic fractures and fractions of platforms that overlap. I mean, there's questions as to the future of audio. Can audio exist without video? The number one platform for podcasting right now is YouTube. And YouTube is a television-oriented platform. And then the answer to that is, well, people are going to sleep at night listening to the audio content on YouTube videos. So what do you do with the video now? What makes a movie? What makes cinema? When television isn't television anymore, and you have streaming services, and they're creating entire seasons of 10 shows, 20 shows, 23 shows. These are 20-hour movies that they're making, and they call it television, but do they get an Oscar or do they get an Emmy? The boundaries, what makes a newspaper anymore? Do you have to be in newsprint to be a newspaper? The changes that are happening in terms of the media landscape are so profound. And as technology changes, so does sociology. As sociology changes, so does business. So the business, the making of money, the targeting of audiences, the selling of advertising, the selling of subscriptions, the whole paradigm is going through tremendous accelerated change, and it's mind-boggling to almost everybody involved in it, including the audience. And that's the reality of what's happening. I appreciate your love of radio. I share it. But radio does have to, in many ways, reinvent itself. It has to have an operational scale that makes sense in terms of what the business environment will support. And it has to do programming that will be appealing to the audiences that it wants to regain. No. You can't just tell them how important radio is. You should be listening to it, and all they hear is long commercial breaks and programming that doesn't satisfy their desires the way they can do with their smartphone and their Bluetooth and their Spotify. Right. It's a different time.
Now, I do want to say this to you. I did not mean to go ahead and try to put any words in, saying that it was so obsolete. I just remember that just when I heard the word, and it's might be an opinion that other people might have, but I didn't want to try to say that was you, and I'm not trying to go and try to say that was yours. I'll make that point clear. But yes, it is something I'd like to. It's a pipe dream, I know, but it's one of those things where I feel like it can be done. If I was a program director at a radio station, give me a station to go and operate. I'll sit in there. I will live in that space, and I will figure out how to monetize that.
No. Back off. Let me give you some pushback now.
Hey,
give me a station that I can operate. I'll do that. No one's giving you anything, Jorge. My answer to you is go out and buy one. Go out and create one. Go out and start one. Don't start your revolution by saying give me. Who is giving this to you? Why you? Who the hell are you to demand that some program director give you a station?
Well, believe it or not, I actually did have a chance. Believe it or not, there was a small market station that I had a friend of mine that was running ethnic programming, but also had a couple of stations of different formats. He let me come in because of my expertise, and there was a rare occasion I got to do that. So that's a slip of the tongue. Yes, I had to go buy it.
No, I don't mean to fight with you. I'm just saying the buck stops here. I've heard every argument. I've been doing this a long time. And it's very easy to complain about what other people are not doing. You have to look at my background. My background is we never asked anybody to give us anything.
Right.
We did it ourselves. And it can be done. As a matter of fact, there's more opportunity now to recreate a radio platform and a radio paradigm now than there was back in the old days when there was gatekeepers and there was boundaries and there were obstacles to being part of it. So I certainly didn't mean to argue with you, but I want you to see clearly a different point of view on the topic of who's responsible for this. Each and every person that thinks it could be better can't expect somebody in the establishment to give them something. Here, you do it. Like there are those that have and those that don't have. The people that have are bankrupt. They're fighting for their jobs. They're fighting for their existence.
Well, the thing is, Michael, is I've had a number of interviews with a few people, radio experts, obviously with more expertise than I have. And I do love the fact I get this learning experience of just saying, okay, I've been barreling on podcasting about some of these things here about radio. And for somebody to go and give me the insight and kind of put me back into a certain space to understand better, this is something I need more of. But I'll tell you this too. I just want to do a quick segue because one of the areas I think of talk radio, I don't know how much of it you do on Talkers about this, but I have been very fascinated by the fact that, National Public Radio and American Public Radio, for that other matter, there's a lot what they've done when they embrace the podcasting space, This American Life, those kind of programs coming in, plus, the fact that they don't run so many commercials, they have the underwritings and not so many of those. So a lot more time for content. Now, we have the recent rescission cuts by Congress, next 2 years coming up, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which would end allotting, $1.1 billion over 2 years to these stations. Now it's led to cost-cutting measures because now we're seeing where money's being from the national side going to local stations. American Public Media is having to make cuts. The public radio landscape, Michael, and the talent pool, how it's being affected, and how that changes the competitive environment for talk radio, and what do you think will happen now? Because NPR has to make some significant changes. I guess how much the effect this really was about the public funding and not having that. What changes about that? I still think as a podcasting platform, they do great work, but I think there's room now for talk radio to really go ahead and take advantage on the private owned side.
Yeah, I see basically public radio and private commercial talk radio as extensions of the same thing, two sides of the same coin. Especially when people say to me, how come all of talk radio is so conservative and there's no liberal? Well, there's a lot of liberal on public radio, and public radio ain't chopped liver. It's big, it's radio, it's the same dial, it's on the AM, it's on the FM band. It operates with the same technology. You can hear it on the same devices, and they talk politics. And when you look at radio as a whole, it covers left, middle, and right when you take public radio into the equation. I don't see public radio as being holier than thou. I don't see them as being a sacred cow. I just see them having a different fundraising model. And as the years have gone by, it's becoming more and more like commercial radio than ever before. They're going to have to learn. Public radio is going to have to learn how to put a radio show together with instead of having 25 people on the staff of a 1 hour radio show, doing it with 2 people. Which is what commercial radios had to do for many, many years. And it won't necessarily hurt the quality. It might even enhance it. So I think in many cases, this has been a debt and a bill that has had to be paid. Public radio has gotten away with a tremendous amount of elitism, arrogance, and waste of money. But I do like the idea that they're there. I do like the idea that they cover subjects and points of view that may not be covered on the commercial side of the dial, because I think that all of it's important. And one of the things I stand for is variety, diversity, and different ways of fulfilling the umbrella category talk radio. To me, talk radio does not mean conservative news talk radio. It includes it. but it also includes the conversation on public radio. It includes sports talk radio. It includes relationship radio, finance radio, radio as a first responder during disasters. I mean, there's an endless array of genres that come under the talk radio umbrella in terms of my view and Talkers Magazine's point of view. But everything in life is a battle of ideologies, battle of genres, a battle of interest groups. And face it, it's a commercial enterprise, whether you do it public or private. It's still about money. It's always about money, and if it's about money, it means it's about clicks, and it's about eyeballs and eardrums and attention, and that's where we're at right now. Everybody's going, look at me, listen to me. What are your numbers? What are your numbers? How are the algorithms treating you? There's an obsession with audience size, and that bothers me. And you as a cool podcaster, it should bother you when you say to somebody, I host the Broadcasters Podcast. The first thing some people probably say to you is, how many listeners do you have? As opposed to, who's listening? Maybe you have 5 listeners, but they're influencers. Maybe they're important. Maybe you're just doing it. You want to do a good podcast for the people listening to your podcast to come away with something. That's what I suspect is the case. But no, it's all become now, how many subscribers do you have? And that's not what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be about narrowcasting. It was supposed to be about specializing and increasing the range of topic matter that's covered, not have everybody fall behind Joe Rogan and try to emulate that, be the next Rogan or the next Limbaugh. What do you think of that?
Well, I'll tell you this, Michael, when you bring up the criticism I might have had by saying I do podcasting, I've told the story before, but the Don and Mike show, it was right at the moment when Anna Nicole Smith had passed away. And I had called into their show. And of course, they always want to know who their callers are. And I mentioned I was in podcasting. And I remember Don Girano specifically saying, well, that's just as good as you working at McDonald's, kid. And then he hung up on me. But, that's okay. That was a badge of honor I took. And actually, that got to be a promo on the local station here where I was affiliating the show. But, one of the things I want to make a mention of when it comes to public radio is that I see at least there's a couple of things when I try to point out something good. There are some things I like about public radio. I do like that some of their stations are doing music discovery. So there's, KEXP and KUTX, and there's these kind of stations that are at least, they're doing like the move of just trying to at least introduce new music, trying to open our ears to something different and something new to hear. And maybe in some way that's like their own version of freeform that might have been what you were programming, in the 70s, but at least it's there. And I'd like to see more of that. If stations don't think that they're not monetizing what they have, let's find something else different. Do we have to stick to the same formats? Maybe we can find something else. But there's a way to get to a younger audience and bring more people. That's my thought about it.
Right. Now, one of the responsibilities in this big equation that you and I are talking about falls on the record companies because they're corporate too. And back in the day, I can talk about it. I was there. You probably weren't born yet, but the record companies nurtured new acts. They had a department called A&R, Artist and Repertoire, and the A&R director they'd sign somebody or a band. Everything was band oriented then. It's no longer that way. Bands are not as big as they were back then, but a band would be looked at for its potential, and they would sign a 4-record deal, and they wouldn't expect to be profitable until the 3rd or 4th album. Now, they won't even sign a band unless the band already comes with 150,000 subscribers on their YouTube channel.
Well, they want to put on a single unless they got a social media post that gets a lot of views and things.
Yeah. They want the musicians to carry them, right, as opposed to carrying the musicians.
Exactly.
So you can't just blame the radio. The record companies have screwed up the music industry terribly. I mean, really terribly. And I hold them accountable for a lot of the problems facing modern music based upon the question. And here's the question. Is music today better than it was back in the day, or is it worse? And that's an argument that you can go around and around on that one for days.
Well, you know what? I think part of the thing with the record labels right now is they just realize, well, we can make money on the catalogs. And they've been doing that for a while. But I haven't seen them go up against the NAB, a very strong lobbying arm of radio, and say, okay, you know what? We want the Music Modernization Act. We want royalties paid to from radio stations now proper, because we're not making enough on streaming. And, if they were able to get that kind of money, then they would go and play ball. But the thing is, then that would probably make changes to the radio stations, because if some of those 100,000 watt stations had to go and start paying, the royalties they might be asking for, they're not going to be able to go ahead and continue to hold those stations. They're going to have to sell them off.
Exactly. Exactly. The water has been polluted. The game doesn't work well anymore. And it's unfortunate because it was a nice balance back in the days, back to the start of our conversation, when I was managing editor of a publication called Radio and Records, the industry's newspaper. The assumption was that the radio industry and the record industry were two sides of the same industry. They were in such synchronized harmony. They had such a symbiotic relationship that it seemed to be written in stone. No one would believe in the 60s and 70s that there would ever be a rift between the record industry and the radio industry arguing over royalties. The record industry did whatever it could to get radio to play its music free. And in return, radio had this free content that brought it listeners and got it ratings. And that just broke down because of greed or short-sightedness or a combination of both on the parts of both industries, which became overly corporate, which is your problem, and rightly so, overly corporate and not dedicated to the other side of the equation, which is to do something that supports the arts, something that's good for the audience, something that's good for the public. That became, capitalism went a little bit over the top in terms of the greedy side of it and the inhuman side of it. And no system, if operated with bad intentions, is going to save the world. Bad capitalists are bad.
No, but the narrative of the radio and records, what you were managing editor of, I think that was, just to go and put a little caveat to this conversation, radio and records need each other. They need to work together again. They got to find a common ground. And I think that's really where radio becomes a very relevant, and the record labels don't have to go ahead and just milk on their catalog, because they only can go so far with those. They need new content. They have to go ahead and put new records out to go ahead and continue to thrive. The newer generations, they might go and adopt the new older music, but it's not going to be like that. They have to have something new. It's got to be something. I want to get into podcasting with you, Michael. We haven't had a chance to go really touch, except for the fact that we know that we had, some shows that might have found their way in the podcasting space, and they've been given a chance to go into talk radio. See what happens with that. But one of the things I've always thought about when it comes to podcasting and I got to work in radio first. I worked at WJNO. Brian Muddle was my program director there. He still does hosting shows at WIOD and things like that. And so I still catch up with them time to time. But the thing is, I got to work in the talk radio format there, board operating, producing, things like that. And I has always been radio, even college radio. I got to work, talking to marketing promotion representatives from all these major labels, and doing the phone calls with them every week and all that kind of stuff. So getting that whole feel, I think with podcasting, you're a free form, open format. Let's go and just talk about whatever's on our minds and just kind of shoot the breeze. But I think there's something about structure that is missing, that I've always said here, that people can learn from radio about the structure of how programs are. I always said, like for me right now, Coast to Coast AM, you get the 25 minute segments of talk, a couple commercial breaks in between, but it's like you give a time frame, people know how much time you're being smart enough about the time you're getting from the listener and spending with them. Maybe they're not going to have the retention to go ahead and listen to a whole 3-4 hour show. What do you think about the part of where podcasters can really be learning about what talk radio does, where structure should come into play a little bit more?
I've always been a fan of structure. I agree with you completely. I think that any conversation about the arts comes down to the balance between form and content. It comes, I call it the stick and the shtick. The stick is the stage. The shtick is the performance. Framing things, describing things, giving something structure, a blueprint, a plan. Otherwise, when you do freeform for its own sake, the medium exists for the people participating in it, not for the audience. And once a medium exists, hey, we get to play whatever we want. We get to express ourselves. Me, 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 me. When it becomes me and not you, when it comes me and not the audience, then it's lost its way, and the structure capsizes, and form becomes content. We're free form. Well, what does free form mean? Does it mean you play good music or bad music? Is the music better if it came off the top of the head of some DJ who doesn't know anything about music? I mean, at what point is the title freeform irrelevant? Well, we don't play it off of a list. Does the listener care if the song they're listening to was on a list or not? There is so much focus put on the people doing the radio formats and not on the people listening to it or the people investing in it as advertisers. So you need, when you write a book, when you make a movie, when you lay out a newspaper, when you design a program such as this, as you did, having someone like me as a guest on a show with someone like you and all that, you need to put together a structure. You need to have a plan. Otherwise, who the hell cares about you and me talking to each other? If it's all about us clapping our gums and exercising our egos. I'm obsessed being on this show with you for an hour to say something that your listeners will benefit by. I'm not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for you to tell me what you think. I'm happy to hear what you think. But if the two of us can do something that makes the people listening more aware, more enlightened, then we're successful. And here's the final point of that observation is I don't care if there are 5 people listening or if there are 5,000 people listening. The 5 people deserve an explanation. They're spending the time. Somebody's listening to this. I mean, it might be your brother. It might be your friend. Whoever it is, I don't care. I'm going to give them the best shot I have at teaching them what I know. And they can decide whether I'm full of it or not. But do you get the drift? It's got to be about the audience. And that's where the structure comes in. It's for the audience, not for us. The radio is not there for DJs to have fun.
No, but the thing is that the people that are going to be controlling, they're going to be the master ceremonies. They're going to go and host this, whatever this show is going to be, whatever it's going to be. When it comes to you, Michael, if you wanted to go and talk about whatever artist you might have played at WNEW, if you would you want to play Ozzy Osbourne or Bruce Springsteen, you talked to them, you interviewed them, went to their concerts, you know the records back and forth because you're a proper fan and you're well knowledge and well read on all this. So your expertise has to be important to go and have that to make you, for the credibility, for your integrity, reputation of what the host is supposed to be. And podcasting, I also say the same thing too, is that I don't want to go and listen to a show just because you have this guest on. It doesn't matter. If you're a good interviewer and you know how to get something good out of a guest and it's a consistent thing every week, I want to make sure that everybody comes back because I'm doing a good job as a host, giving good content. And it's not just the content itself that maybe we'll get lucky that something comes out of the interview or whatever information comes out. I want to make sure I'm presenting myself and hosting at the best possible way that I can do this show. Now, when it comes to what radio could be learning from podcasts, we all have a thing about the spot breaks. There is something to be said about where, okay, if I got to hear another commercial for Home Depot or some other 800 number for something other service, and we've heard these commercials over and over, or some PSA I've heard over, and like the ad breaks are still locked into space because, well, we're going to eventually get those spots filled. That's what the salespeople think, but sometimes they don't. And since they don't, I'm wondering if there's something where podcasters, they're doing live reads. There's something a lot of produced out of here, and they're only doing so many reads out of what they have. Should radio reconsider maybe, I understand they got to have advertising, but a different way to do this. Maybe if they had the authenticity of the hosts that are being built up to do that part. And, they used to be the ones that would go out on location and go to an event or whatever it is, or they would at least go ahead and endorse products. If you had more of that going on and less of what's filling the long ad breaks, what can be learned from that?
Well, first of all, they are doing that. They sell talk show host endorsements, or they call them live reads, at a premium. When somebody has a following in talk radio, people trust them, and so the feeling is they'll also trust them when they say, that so and so's delicatessen makes the best tuna sandwiches in Peoria. Let's go get it because my favorite talk show host told me to do it. So that actually does exist right now. What you're touching on is a bigger problem, and that is the biggest problem facing commercial radio is the commercial. That in a world where people don't like spending money for things that they're getting for free on the internet, or they think they're getting it for free, they don't feel like spending money, and time is money. When you're asked to sit for 5 minutes to a commercial break, well, it's free radio. We're paying our bills with the commercials. People's time is money. If you're expecting somebody to spend 2/3 of their commute time listening to commercials and not hearing, entertainment or programming, that's asking a lot of people. So the biggest problem facing commercial radio today is the institution of the commercial. Does it have to be 60 seconds? Can it be 10 seconds? Do we have to have long chains of commercials that can go 5, 6, 7 minutes per break? Well, no, there's got to be a better way to do it. Should we separate the commercials from the actual linear radio station by putting it on a sub-channel or putting them on air or having some other way of doing it? Maybe. Nobody's come up with this answer yet. So one of the biggest glaring negatives to listening to commercial radio is to have to put up with the damn spot breaks when, in fact, a podcast may not have that, or you can control the real-time flow of a podcast. You can't control the real-time flow of a live and local radio station. Radio's got these problems to deal with. You bring up a good question. I don't have the answer yet. If I did, I'd be the most influential programmer in the world.
Right.
But it's a hard problem to overcome.
And when I say the ads, yes, there have always been live reads out there, and I think some have always done better than others. There's a reason why Howard Stern can do live reads over and over, and it's like, it's the relaxed read. Not so much scripted, but I wish it wouldn't be the same read over and over. So it's not, I think it's part of it where if I could just hear the host do the ad and just have it be something random that just goes into the mix of their show and not necessarily have to be pre-recorded beforehand, same thing over and over. That's one of the things I think that with podcasting, it's always where it goes into the flow of the conversation, not just being added in as a spot. That's where I come from with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it knocks on the door to a thing called product placement. At what point does the live read become a subliminal message? When my girlfriend and I went to the concert, we stopped on the way home at John's, burger joint. Wow, they make great burgers there, and blah 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 blah. And they go on to something else. Well, that's a commercial. But it's more of like product placement. They're trying everything to monetize this thing called radio, and it's very, very challenging. That's all I'm saying. It's challenging because you can't do this without money. As I said before, if you don't like money or you think that it should be done for the public good without anybody getting paid, well, you're dreaming. It's a nice thought, but it's just not going to happen. The key to great radio has always been the kids like me who went into it, who understood that it is a carefully balanced relationship between art and commerce, that you have to take into consideration the art and the culture that it directly targets and works with, and you also have to take into the equation, how do we make money doing this, or how do we at least break even so that we can pay for it all? And that's always been the issue in the arts in a free marketplace. And it'll always be that, and it's the best we can have. Anything better becomes restrictive and has diminishing returns.
Michael, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. Thank you so much for being on. Talkers.com is the website. Talkers.com. Go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter. If you haven't done so, please do that now. And also check out some of your programs as well. There's the Michael Harrison interview. There's
We have a bunch of stuff. We have a bunch of stuff there. If people find it interesting, that's great.
Close Far Out. I saw that's also in your YouTube. You have a YouTube channel as well, so there's a lot to go and get into.
Right. Hey, I enjoyed talking to you. You know, you and I are basically in agreement. We both love radio. It's just a matter of figuring out how to keep radio alive without being in denial of the changes that we are facing. As I don't know how old you are, but I consider myself an immigrant from the 20th century. And, you know, this is a brave new world, this 21st century. It's extremely exotic, extremely different than the world that many of the people that listen to radio grew up in. And radio, my main message to radio has been learn how to maintain the magic of the 20th century, the showbiz, the information, the education, the enlightenment, and all of the wonderful things that radio was in the 20th century, while integrating into the digital era in a way that makes sense and keeps it relevant. That's it. That's been the job. And that job is not done yet. And I'm enjoying being part of that. Thanks for having me on the show, Jorge. You did a really nice job, and it's been fun talking to you. I hope we get to do it again.
Absolutely. Once again, Michael Harrison, editor and publisher of Talkers Magazine. Thanks for being on the Broadcasters Podcast.